In the next 30 minutes I am going to show you how to turn this flat raw image into this cinematic, high contrast, moody cinematic look. You can do this by just following this simple structure that I'm going to show you. You can replicate this on every edit and do crazy edits like this and this. And I'm going to show you this simple structure and how you can replicate this same exact structure on your every single image. I use this structure on 99% of my images, and it's just, you can turn these flat, boring, raw images, these cinematic masterpieces, in just a couple minutes. This edit took me like 15 minutes as max. So let's get started. Okay, now we have the flat raw image. It is very flat because it's raw, it's unprocessed, it's uncompressed, it contains a lot of data that we can utilize. The first thing we want to do is adjust the exposure. This is a very dark image and I've used pretty low ISO, so there's not any noise in the image, as we can see. So let's just pull the exposure slider. When I'm pulling the exposure slider, I'm watching the histogram in the top right corner. There's 5 parts in the histogram. At the far left we have blacks, which are the darkest parts of our image. Then we have shadows, exposure, meaning the midtones, highlights, and whites at the far right, which are the brightest part of our image. At the top corners you can see these triangles. By hovering over this you can see show shadow clipping and show highlight clipping. What this means is that we are losing detail in the blacks. Meaning right here, we can hover over, we can click this, we can see small parts. So we want to raise the blacks until the color disappears. Now we are not clipping any blacks. Next I want to adjust this white slider because as we can see here, there's a lot more detail in the whites we can still utilize. So I'm just gonna pull this white slider, and there, now we clip, so we go backwards a little bit, and now we have achieved a good exposure. Now we can still adjust the shadows. The thing I want to achieve with these basic adjustments is to achieve a flat, natural looking base that we can then edit further. So first is the exposure and white balance to achieve a natural looking image. We're gonna raise the shadows a little bit, like 30 points, and decrease the highlights by 20. Then we can go into the temperature changes. I want to achieve a mythical forest, like cold forest vibe, which is why I'm going to bring this down a little bit. But not too much, because it's going to look unnatural. We are going to do that in the tone curves. Then just adjust the tint. I think it's a little too purple, which I'm gonna bring it down a little bit. This just pops the greens and makes the overall image look way better. So now, we have set the correct exposure and white balance. Then we have the global texture, clarity and dehaze sliders. I don't usually touch these too much. With this image we want to achieve that moody looking forest, like mythic forest vibe, which is why I'm going to bring this down by 10 points. And same with the clarity. And to balance that clarity over the soft looking image, I want to increase texture by a little bit. Just a little less than what I decreased the clarity by. So +3, -5, -10 is my go-to for this image, so I can achieve that soft look. And I am not going to touch this global vibrance and saturation sliders because They should look unnatural. You can do way specific more color changes in the color mixer tab and tone curves and color grading. So I recommend not touching these two sliders too much. Next we are moving to the tone curve. This is the most powerful tool in Lightroom. With this we can control the contrast, separating the highlights from the shadows. Similar to the histogram, tone curve has 5 parts. At the far left, blacks, then the shadows, midtones, highlights, and whites. We want to start in the point curve panel. Start by clicking on the line 3 times, adding point to the shadows, midtones, and highlights. I'm going to start by changing the shadows. I'm just gonna bring them down a little bit. You can see the overall image is changing. It's a little bit darker now. You can see the change here. There's a lot more depth to it already by only changing the shadows. Then there's one trick that makes the image way more cinematic. We bring up the blacks by around 10 points. You can do more depending on the image. This will make the blacks very soft and the roll-off is very clean. Just look at the difference. Next I am going to change the highlights. I'm going to bring this up by not too much because I want to achieve that dark moody look. And I'm going to do the same that I did with the blacks for the whites. But to achieve that very soft image for this look, I'm going to bring them down a bit more, around 15 points. Then the last thing there is to do in the point curve is the midtones. This is just fine tuning it. You shouldn't change this slider too much. I want overall pretty high contrast, so I'm going to bring this up by around 3 points. So there you go. That looks, in my opinion, very good base. Before I go into the color channels, I'm gonna touch a color mixer a little bit. A trick I do with most of my images that are taken in the nature, I go into the saturations tab and bring down greens by 20 points or more. This creates that pretty dark and moody look for the greens. For this image I want the greens to pop a little more, so I'm gonna bring the luminance up by 15 points. Otherwise, from the greens, I don't want other colors to pop as much. So I'm going to bring down saturation of oranges and yellows. As you can see, the road is changing by a lot. So we are going to bring this down by 15 points and same to this. This creates a more uniform color look, which is way more cinematic than just having every color out there. You have to pick few colors that outperform the rest of colors. For this image I'm going for the blue, cyan and green look. So I want to eliminate most of the warm colors in this image, which are orange, yellow and red. So now I'm also going to bring down the luminance of those colors a little slightly. Then I'm going into the blues and just checking what that does. There's not much blue in this image, so I'm actually going to increase the saturation by a little bit, not too much, so we have blues here in the sides. So it adds that shallow effect. I'm also going to bring up the luminance of the blues by ever so slightly. For this image I'm also going to change the hue of the greens very slightly. I don't want it to look very unnatural. You will see soon how we achieve that look. So now that we have the individual colors changed, we can go back to the tone curve and we can look at the color channels. These are very scary for some people. Most people do not touch these settings, especially beginners. And I used to be the same. I never touched these sliders because one smallest change makes a huge impact on the image. But I'm going to show you how to use this very easily. So first we analyze what colors are in the image. In the shadows in the sky here we can see blues. In the highlights there's like blues, a little bit yellow. In the shadows there's a lot of red and orange, which we want to eliminate. So I already have a look in mind that I want to achieve. It is the mythical forest, like cyan green vibe. So here in the first tab, the red channel. Here we have the red in the top left corner and cyan in the top right corner. I want more cyan in my image, especially in the shadows, which are now like a little bit red. So I'm going to bring down the cyan slider a little bit. I'm going to do the same with the midtones and highlights, but not too much because this already looks very unnatural. So we are going to change that ever so slightly, like 2 points. I'm also going to change the blacks, bring them down a little bit towards the cyan. So that is already a huge impact on the image. Next up we are going to change small adjustment to the green and blue channels. We already achieved pretty much the look we wanted, so we just make small corrections with these. I'm gonna bring this down by 1 point to add depth to this road. And just add a little bit of green to the highlights. This just makes a more uniform look with the green forest when the sky has a little bit of green. Then lastly we have the blue channel. We want a little bit of warmth, but not too much. So I'm going to change that by 1 point. Then I'm going to add a little bit of blue into the highlight. So we are keeping the same theme as the other ones. The most important thing working with channels is changing every channel, because otherwise the colors are going to look off. Let me show you a little example. Change the exposure of this a little bit so I can show you what I mean. I'm just going to make an S curve on this red channel. Then I'm going to copy channel settings, paste. It's going to look off, but when I add the third channel, it's going to look normal again. And this is the effect it had. And if you want to achieve a little bit cyan, we just pull the cyan slider, and boom. With less contrast, we can do it here. That's a more cyan image. So that's why we edited all the 3 channels, even though we just made very small adjustment to the blue and green channels. Because most of the work was here in the cyan channel, red channel I mean. Next up is color grading. The thing I want to achieve with color grading is to just add a little more color without adding contrast, because changing tone curves, even though you're in the channels, the red channel, the green channel, the blue channel, you are adding contrast to the image. With color grading, you're pretty much only adding color. Which means we can go here into the cyans and just add a little more cyan. We can do this in every channel. But I don't want to add too much color because the image already has a lot of it. Just gonna make the highlights blue to emphasize that skylight a little more. Then this is a very good trick to add exposure to the midtones, is by changing the luminance in the midtones of color grading panel. This already makes a big difference. This image I won't denoise because I saw the ISO 100, so there's not much noise, and we are going to be adding noise anyway, so that won't matter. I'm just gonna add some sharpening. On Windows, if you hold Alt, you can bring this and you can see where it's adding the saturation. You can do this on Mac and mobile too. On mobile, I believe you need to hold the image while changing the slider, and on Mac you press Command instead of Alt. And why we want to do this is now we see where the sharpening is being added. Because if you apply sharpening everywhere, it adds noise. So this is the best way to add sharpening. So there's nothing else I want to do here. Then I'm going to move into the effects. And first I'm going to add grain. I like to add around 10 to 25 points of grain. And with this image, like mythical, very moody, I'm gonna add like 20. And bring the size a little bit to make this a little bit rougher. And I like that result. I'm not gonna add a vignette because I am going to add a manual vignette through masking. For this I am not going to use the calibration panel because mobile doesn't have it, and I want this to be achieved with every platform. And next up we move the masking, which is arguably one of the most important parts of editing. With masking we can add depth, we can guide the viewer's eye, and we can make the photo cinematic. That's what we want. I always start with the linear gradient at the bottom. I just bring this here. Bring this a little bit down, then just decrease the exposure and increase the dehaze by a little bit. What this does is this guides the viewer's eye towards the center. It instantly adds depth to the image. Next, what we want to do is we want to take the brush tool and we want to zoom out of the image. Then we are going to paint around the edges on the bottom. These are the dark areas. The light is coming from here towards the center. So I'm going to add a custom vignette just to the bottom. This basically has the same goal as the first mask. I'm going to name this custom vignette. I'm also going to name this one with the bottom linear gradient. Next, I'll talk about the lights coming from here. I'm going to draw a radial gradient where the light is coming from and turn it so. Now here comes the trick to add contrast and depth to your image. I want to affect only the highlights with this mask because I am shaping the light. So I'm subtract, check luminance range. Select a dark part of your image and change this luminance range slider like this. So now we have a mask that only affects the highlights. We are going to bring up the exposure slightly to add a little bit more contrast. Then I'm just going to bring down the clarity and the haze so we get that soft look. Then in the highlight I'm going to add a bit grain, but not much. This is going to make it look a little bit more cinematic, to have more grain in the highlights than the shadows. Typically you don't even add grain to the shadows, like maybe never. So the professional way to add grain would be to add it through masking with linear gradient. Then we are going to add a new mask with linear gradient. Select the whole image. And subtract luminance range and decrease. Do the same as last time, but now decrease the highlights. So now we have a mask that only affects the shadows. And we bring down the exposure. We can even bring down the temperature a little bit, not that much. And now we bring up the dehaze and clarity a little bit, and texture. And now, that is the effect we have achieved. Now there's still a lot more things we can do with this image to make it have even more depth and look even more cinematic. One thing is to add linear gradients to the side, like this. And bring down the exposure slightly. And add a little bit of coldness, like bring down the temperature. Then select a radial gradient and go into the middle and add exposure a little bit. And then add warmth a little bit. So now we have a little bit of color contrast as well. And one last thing we can do is take a brush tool and just paint over this path in the middle. This path works as a leading line, so we can add a little bit of exposure to that and sharpness by increasing clarity and dehaze. So the path pops out a little more. And this is the final result we achieve just by masking. And this is the raw image. The before and after. There is one more thing I wanted to show you. So we will go back to the raw and do the basic adjustments. Again. So, here are the presets that come with this editing kit. We can use these to speed up the editing workflow. So, once we have adjusted the exposure and the white balance, we can go ahead and apply the cinematic base. What this does is changes a little bit of the tone curves, adds an S-curve for the contrast, add some sharpness and grain. This is the only thing that cinematic base does. This is the very base of the image. Then we can go ahead and change the exposure and the clarity and everything else. We can take this a step further with the mood and atmosphere and the natural color balance. I like to add the natural color first because we follow the workflow. First exposure, then white balance, then contrast, then color, then masking. By following that, you can edit every single image. So what natural color balance does is change the color mixer, decrease the saturation so the colors look a bit more natural. Then it changes the color channels very slightly, very slightly, because it's hard to change this and make the preset universal. That's why I like more these presets that are just the base, that don't have the creative look applied yet. This saves you time when editing a lot. Then this also adds color grading a little bit. It adds a little bit of blue in the shadows and a little bit of orange in the highlights and green in the midtones. So it's just a little bit of color contrast, complementary colors. Then it also adds a little bit of calibration. It just makes the color a little bit richer. It's hard to even see the difference in the before and after, but in the final image it makes sense. Then lastly we can apply this mood and atmosphere. What this does is change the texture, clarity and dehaze, and 2 new masks. The first mask only affects the highlights. This adds a little bit of exposure and this really cool soft light effect. You can achieve this by decreasing the clarity to 20 to 30 points and increasing the texture around the same. But what I like to do, I like to increase the texture a little bit less than I decrease the clarity, so that it achieves a little bit softer look. Then I also bring down the dehaze very slightly. I have also added a little bit of grain to this mask so you have some more grain in the highlights. Then the other mask is only affecting the shadows. I have bring down the exposure to add a little bit contrast and brought up the effects, dehaze, clarity and texture by very slightly. We don't want to add grain to the shadows like I already explained. And that's about it. This is a very good base that you can now change the color and achieve the exact look we just made, but in way less time. And it's just very simple. Once you learn this editing workflow, it will be very fast to make cinematic edits consistently. I used to struggle with this because every image would turn out different, but now that I learned this workflow, I can make every image look very cinematic with this exact workflow. It is so important, I cannot say it enough. And once you get better at tone curves, you can do all of this crazy stuff with the tone curves where it looks like really crazy and you wonder how is that turning out like this. Like look, this is only the tone curves. Same with this one. Tone curves are the most powerful tool in Lightroom and you should try to master it. But that's about it. Now you can try to recreate this edit on your own by opening the raw file in the editing pack and following this exact Lightroom workflow. I hope you learned something new and I hope to see you in the future as well.